I don't know if you've ever tried to lead something where you knew it's what God wanted you to do, or you knew it's what you should do, but you knew you also had no power to do this on your own. Like you had to mobilize groups of people to make this happen. I mean, right now in election season, essentially, it doesn't matter how powerful you are in this country, it doesn't matter how rich you are in this country, you still need votes. You still have to mobilize people, all right? So that's what every candidate's trying to do. They are very powerful people, and they are very influential people, and they are after a mission to become president, and yet they also know, like, they can't do it. Like, they have to have the mobilization of people to say, yeah, I'm going to vote for you. And so that's kind of the way it is. Well, Nehemiah is the same situation a little bit. I mean, he's got this burden that God has given him. It's broken his heart to go back and repair the walls and provide security and comfort and a thriving environment to his people in Jerusalem. And he knows God's calling him to do it. He's got the king's permission, not just permission, but last week we saw that the king granted him, like, take all the timber from my forest. I'll give you letters of, safe passage. And hey, I'll send, a dispatch of my army with you just to make sure you get there. Got the king's stamp of approval. But then he arrives in Jerusalem and he knows, like, okay, I'm here, but I got to mobilize some people here because I can't do this by myself. And so you kind of get to that situation, that feeling that this has got to happen. I've got to figure this out. Well, the first thing I want to kind of, as a update, is to remind you, whenever you're leading something, whenever you're saying, hey, I'm ready to go all in on something here, you got to say no to some stuff. I mean, Nehemiah, what he's done up to the middle of chapter 2, chapter 1 and chapter 2, what he's done is he's basically cut himself off and unentangled himself from everything that he was doing. He's gotten out of being the cupbearer to the king. He's gotten permission to go. He said, hey, goodbye to everybody that he's known his entire life, and he's heading to Jerusalem. When I talk to some of you about being all in, you're like, all in, yeah, I'm all in. And then you're all in with something else tomorrow, and you're all in with something else on Wednesday, and you're all in next weekend with something else, and you're all in for everything. And when you're all in for everything, you know what? You're all in for nothing. And that's the reality. And so I don't want to overlook the leadership that Nehemiah has done in his own life as preparation for leading and mobilizing people to be all in. He's got to be all in himself, and he knows being all in means, hey, I got to cut myself away from some things. We just can't keep adding to our life. I mean, I know it's easy to do that in a sense. It's even helpful to kind of think that way, like, wow, I should do that or I should be that. But then you got to do the critical task of saying, okay, if I do all that, then what do I got to push to the side? I remember a real critical time in our family's life when we were, wrestling through is before adoption had happened. It's the time we talked about adoption, but we really haven't done anything about it. And I remember kind of setting a date on the calendar and just being like, okay, this is the day. This is the day where we go all in. This is the day where we say, okay. And I gave up 2 things that I was doing that I loved doing. I just said, you know what, guys, I'm sorry I can't do those things anymore. And you just start carving out actual time to say, I'm going to set my hand to this task. I'm going to get it done. I can remember after we adopted T and Garrett, them talking about wanting to adopt Lemmy and see if Lemmy has a family and on and on. And we talked, oh yeah, that's. I mean, we talked about it for months, guys. All in while, like our hearts for it, but like we're not doing anything about it. And I remember finally we're just like, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. We're doing it. Here we go. And it required I got to cut myself away from some things. You can't just say yes to everything. If you're all in with everything, trust me, you're all in with nothing. All right? So when we're saying, hey, let's go all in, we got to know that means we got to cut away a little bit. And Nehemiah's already done that. He's gotten to Jerusalem. That's where we pick up the story in Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 11 and 12. So I came to Jerusalem, and I was there for 3 days. Then I got up during the night, I and a few men with me. I told no one what my God had put into my heart to do for Jerusalem. Now, this is interesting to me because I'm not this kind of leader. And it's always good to look at leaders in the Bible that mobilized hundreds of people to get something done that's huge significance and part of God's will and all that stuff. And learn from the different personalities that they have. I don't know, Nehemiah was a bold leader. He might have been a lot quieter leader than I was or I am. He just didn't talk about it. He had this huge burden. He shows up. He doesn't tell anybody about it. And he goes out and does some reconnaissance work, if you will. See, there are people who talk about having a vision, and then there's people who act on a vision. And I think Nehemiah knows, hey, I got to get some action done here. Because talk is cheap. We talk a lot about a lot of stuff that we'd like to do one day, someday. And I get concerned about people who say, hey, I'm off to this. I'd love to do this. And then 3 months later, they're talking about doing something else. I'm like, wait a minute, did you do that? No, I don't know. And it's just always a conversation about what's next or what they're going to do or what they're pursuing. But it never seems to be backed up with some action. And also, I feel like Nehemiah knows that there's wisdom in kind of figuring out, hey, what needs to happen? I mean, this is the first time maybe that he's ever even been to Jerusalem, okay? And he's finally getting there, probably awed, probably more despair than he was, expecting. And he's just kind of taking it all in. Let me survey what the reality is here. And that's true of any big vision. I mean, you can have a deep vision, a deep burden for something that God wants you to do and not know all the details. I mean, that's just the reality. He knew God was burdening him to go and make a difference. But he had no clue how big the task was. He had no clue what needed to happen. He just knew that he had a burden from God and permission from the king. And so he went. When we talk about what God's leading us to do as a church in our All-In campaign right now, I think a lot of the same thing. It's kind of some balance on when you start talking about this. Because like Nehemiah, you can't talk about it too early. And before you have any details or any kind of direction. And then at the same time, with big vision, you can talk about it too late. And people are trying to figure out, hey, where are we going, what are we doing? And I know in this room, you probably feel both of those things. Some of you are like, wow, you started talking about this too early because you've been with me through several, start, stop, attempts. Because this has been our vision that God's given us for the last 12 years of what we're to step into, but we haven't had the details. And then others of you in this room, and you feel like, wow, we're 4 weeks away from the day that we're committing to do this, and we're 4 weeks away from giving a gift, and 4 weeks away from making a 36-month commitment. We're 4 weeks away, and I feel like I'm a little late. Like we've been too late talking about this, and I look at the breadth of those people, and I say I can agree with you. I understand that, and I understand how it feels that way. But you need to know that, so I just kind of want to give you a little history, catch you up a little bit. Leadership-wise, we've been talking about this for about 12 years. Leadership-wise, we've been praying through this. And then, if you've been here for, more than 8 or 10 years, you know that we've had a few things, I think this is what's going to happen. I think this is what God's doing. And we've pursued that to a dead end. And then we've pursued that to a dead end. And it can feel like, wow, those are wasted effort. And it was really some disappointments in my life that are really challenging. And at the same time, once you get over the disappointment, you really learn, man, this is what we learned in this process. This is what the Lord taught us in this process. And none of these experiences are wasted experiences. One of the things that we learned in the process is if you're going to do a for-profit, nonprofit partnership, you need to have some for-profit partners that know what they're doing. Because I have really very little interest in running for-profit businesses. I know many of you do, and that's great. But we're leading a church here, and you know that if you get wrapped up into managing and leading all this other stuff, like you're kind of worried how am I going to lead the church, and what's this going to do, and all that stuff. And we kind of, a few of these starts, it's like, wow, we need some partners. About 4 years ago, somebody convinced me to go to a 1.5-day workshop here in Charlotte. I usually never go to these things. The guy that convinced me to go, he usually never goes to these things. David, I think there's something about this. I don't know. We ought to just go. They're serving free lunch 2 days, so I said, well, we'll go and eat free lunch, and it's not that far away. The first guy I heard talk was Dan Cook from BGW Services, Building God's Way. And I thought, I listened to a guy who's an architect developer, and I heard the same vision for the church that I knew was in my heart. It was just strange to me because it's not coming from a pastor voice. It's coming from an architect. And he's like, guys, this is what needs to happen. This is where the future needs to go for sustainable buildings. And so there's a website, BGW Services. I would really encourage you to go out, bgwservices.com. They got a great website and kind of, look through some things they're doing. This is Dan Cook. He was here in January for 2 days workshop. He was here 1st of March for a 3-day B101 workshop. Dan's going to be with us April 3rd here on Sunday, and so you'll get to meet him and hear more about his story and the journey that God's brought him on. But he's the founder of BGW, and he's one of the architects as well. But they do a lot of work, okay? But he's like, David, for the last several years, the only work that I'm doing is what we're pursuing. It's sustainable solutions for churches with for-profit, nonprofit partnerships. And that's all he's, the rest of the company's doing the other stuff. I'm dedicating myself to this. Because it's who God's made him to be. It's the burden that he has on his heart. He just comes at it from a different angle. His partner, Eric Boehm, Eric has been a pastor for 20-some years, and he happened to just, it's an amazing story. Eric will be here on April 10th to share with us a little bit. So in 2 Sundays back-to-back, you'll get to hear from these guys for a portion of the service. And he's been a pastor, and his church ended up buying a hotel to meet in, and it just kind of sent him on a whole different path ministry-wise. And so he's part of this partnership, and these are great guys that God has just led to kind of form the business side, the for-profit side of how to do, create and manage these businesses. And so, we found these guys 4 years ago. Honestly, like we signed a contract with them several years ago, and we kind of both came to the conclusion, like, we're not ready for this. Like, they weren't ready on their end, we're not ready on our end, and we just said, hey, let's just push pause and take a break. And we did for, 18 months or so. And then last year, a couple years ago, a couple from our church went out to visit their site. Last year about this time, my wife and I went out to see the event center that they had opened and their daycare, and just kind of dig in a little bit deeper with them. In June, Dan actually flew out to kind of help us look at what property might we do this on? And just me, I'm like, well, I know this area, and I think, well, you know, if you're going to build something, you build in an open field, right? Because then you don't have to clear trees. And so the first place I took him was right up there on Rocky River, close to 485, right next to Bojangles. You know, there's just an open field. And I'm like, this would be a great place. And he's like, well, I can tell you're a pastor, David. I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, you could about get this property for free, and you'd pay about $1.5 million just to level it out. I was like, oh, yeah, I guess that's not going to work. He's like, no, it's not going to work. And I mean, I remember just him turning his head. He's looking at this. No, I don't think this is going to work. And he's like, what about this property? And he just started walking. And I was like, well, I don't know anything about that property. Well, let's go look around. I was like, I don't know, Dan. There's a house on that property. Well, it looks abandoned. We'll go ahead and walk through there. And so we just started walking that property. He's like, well, I wonder what, there's a water tower back here. I wonder who owns the water tower. Can we do some parking under that? I mean, it's kind of how it went. And, you know, it didn't take long. He's like, I think this is it. Well, let's see if this property's for sale. Well, it's not for sale. There's 2 plots there, and neither of them for sale. Well, let's try to figure that out. And so we approached property owners of property that was not for sale. And in about 3 months' time, we had contracts on them. Now, we didn't finalize those contracts till about 6 months later. And so it's just been like one of those tasks that you're like, hey, not sure when you kind of jump in, but here we are, all right? And that's kind of how this process has gone. But these partnerships have been crucial in this process. So even though it seems new to a lot of us in this room, you know, some people in the church, groups and pockets of people have been praying through this for a lot of years. And April 17th is coming up, you know, quick, 4 weeks from now. So here's the work that Nehemiah did as he got to the city. He says this, the only animal I took was the animal I rode. I went out by night by the valley gate, past the dragon's gate, the dragon spring, and to the dung gate. I don't know, you know, in Nehemiah's mind, let's just get the worst part of this out of the way first. Let's go to the dung gate. I'm not sure. I probably say that for last, but... And I inspected the walls of Jerusalem that had been broken down and its gates that had been destroyed by fire. Then I went on to the fountain gate and to the king's pool. But there was no place for the animal I was riding to continue. So I went up by way of the valley by night and inspected the wall. Then I turned back and entered by the valley gate and so returned. The officials did not know where I'd gone or what I was doing. I had not yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, and the rest that were to do the work. He hadn't said anything to anybody. But he goes out and kind of does his homework, if you will. What's this going to take to build this gate? What's it going to take to repair the wall at this point? What's it going to take to do this gate? What is needed? What's necessary here? You know, he's kind of doing that planning. And then, it says, then I said to them, gather the people together. You see the trouble we're in, how Jerusalem lies in ruins with its gates burnt. Come, let's rebuild the wall of Jerusalem so that we may no longer suffer disgrace. Now, I love his phrase here. Who's going to say no to that? No, I don't want to rebuild the wall. I'd just rather be in disgrace my whole life. You know, it's kind of like, well, duh, who doesn't want to do that? And you kind of feel that way about this whole situation. You know, it seems so easy. It seems so reasonable. I mean, why wouldn't people just say, okay, let's do it? In fact, you got to ask the question, why hadn't they done it up to this point? The fact of the matter is these walls have been in this condition for 140 to 150 years. That's all these people had ever known was disgrace. They're just used to being this way. And listen, when I look at our world, even in our churches, we look out in the world and we do not think this is not the way it should be. Because we're too used to it being this way. We're too used to people living life barely getting by. We're too used to people living life where you have to drink your problems away. We're too used to living life that a marriage isn't much fun, but we're just going to stick it out. We're too used to just squeaking by in our families and never getting to a thriving point where everybody actually enjoys being together. We're too used to allowing ourselves to be deceived by evil in this world. We're too used to believing that you're not worth something. We're too used to living in disgrace. We're too used to that. We're too used to believing that God doesn't care about us or about our community. We're too used to believing that other people are supposed to take advantage of us. Some people are too used to believing that you're supposed to be abused and ransacked. We're too used to seeing the suffering of others and feeling powerless to do something about it. And we got to shake ourselves out of that. That's what Nehemiah says. Hey, let's do this. And it seems obvious that you would say yes to that, but they said no to that for 150 years. They're so used to it. Look, our world is used to living. Our world, everybody in our world, they're used to living with the damning effects of sin in this life and in our world. They're used to trying to eke out a living, a survival. I'm more amazed that people survive. I'm amazed that people who don't have Christ's power in their life actually eke out a decent marriage. Because I don't know how they do it. But they've eked it out and figured it out, and they don't even have a source of joy and love and peace living in them in God's Spirit. Our world is so used to living with it. It's normal to them, but it doesn't have to be. Someone has to stand up and say, look, this is not the way it should be. This is not the way it could be if God used us to bring heaven to earth. And see, we've got to move from someone should do this to we should do this. That's what Nehemiah did. Somebody should do this. No, I should do this. And then we got to move from we should do this to we're going to do this. Because we can talk about things all day long, and the church is notorious for that, right? And then we got to move from we are going to do this to you should do this with us. And that's where you put your credibility on the line. And you say to your friend, hey, they're right. Let's do this. Come join us. Nehemiah says, I told them that the hand of my God had been gracious upon me. So God's favor was with him. And also that the words the king had spoken to me. And look at their response. 150 years, generation after generation, living in disgrace. They said, let's start building. So they committed themselves to the common good. They knew it was best. But they needed a leader to say, let's go, let's do this. And they said, okay, we're in. Let's do it. You see, so often I hear that change is hard. People don't like change, David. And I'm like, I get that, but sometimes it's not hard at all. Sometimes it's really, really easy. It just takes a leader to paint a picture of the way things should be and the way things could be if God uses you to bring heaven to earth. People are right on the brink of embracing complete life change because they're tired of trying to struggle in their marriage. They're right on the brink of saying yes because they have absolutely no peace in their life. There's a guy that was here in the first service. I asked his permission to share a story. I'm not going to share his name. I haven't heard from this guy in 8 years. He called the church phone number last Friday. And he said, I got to meet with somebody. I met with him Tuesday night for coffee. We started at 8 and we finished about 10:30. And I don't know what this is about. I'd have told Mindy, he just needed to meet. And sat down, and the first words out of his mouth was like, I have absolutely no peace in my life. I can't stop the thoughts in my head. My heart's racing all the time. He went through a divorce a couple years ago, and he just like, I can't trust anybody. And then I'm sitting there listening, and he says, I think I just need Jesus in my life. It was a real hard one for me, guys. I was like, yeah, I think you do. I'm just nodding. And I just kept listening. And he basically shared the gospel with himself. This is not a lie. I didn't have to do anything. I said, well, then, now what are you thinking? Well, I'm thinking if I'm going to get any peace and any joy, and he's telling me about a guy, and it sounded to me like this guy just accepted Christ that he works with. And it sounded to me that he just accepted Christ like 6 or 12 months ago. And he said, and I've seen it, and he like it works. I've watched his life. He's got peace now. And he's telling me about it. He's like, I want that. And I was like, well, I think that's good. I think you ought to get that. Sounds like a good deal, man. And I'm like, and he's just talking, and he's just going on, and he talks himself into salvation. It's not, I haven't talked to this guy in 8 years. And I didn't even talk to him much 8 years ago. Had nothing to do with this. Some people are really ready for change. And that night, I heard him pray one of the sweetest prayers, the best prayers. They're always the best prayers. If you don't think you know how to pray, you do. In fact, you do probably better than you think. And you do probably better than people who have been praying for you a lot of years. Because it's just so real, so honest, so clear. He's like, man, I am tired of living with no peace and no joy. And he's like, Jesus, I need you to forgive me. And I want to be in your family. And boom. It's just amazing. People are ready. Sometimes they're right on the brink. A community that we look out and we see darkness. I talked to a teacher. She's like, David, like the schools, like just the things that we see, like it's heartbreaking. And it feels when you see that amount of evil and that amount of just sin built up and hurt and pain, you think, man, how can we make any difference at all? Like change seems so far away. And then you just think, no, some people are just right on the brink of it. But it takes a leader like Nehemiah with a vision that's backed up by action. It takes a group of people who say, hey, let's do this. Let's do this. And it takes a commitment. They committed themselves to the common good. To go all in on this means they had to stop doing a bunch of other stuff. And they did. And it wasn't easy. The rest of the book is like, it's not easy. But they did it. When it comes to this place and what God's leading us to, this is what I'm asking you. Like we're leading you on this journey in this prayer journal for you to spend 1 hour with God. We're asking you to fast a meal, 1 hour. I promise you'll survive. Go without one meal. Don't care what meal it was or it is. And just spend an hour with God. Like that song that we just sung, still my heart. Let your voice be all I hear right now. Because all we want you to do is to invest time with God. To listen to His direction in your life. And to believe and know that everybody else in our church is doing the same thing. And then we want to get to April 17th. And we're asking people to bring a financial gift for this all-in project that is a result of their conversation with God, that is them responding to God. And bring a financial gift as well as make a 36-month commitment, financial commitment to this project. Our goal on this is $925,000 for the 2 contracts on the properties. And so we're going to have some soft costs in that as well. So we're going to be about $1 million, but we need to close on these properties. So April 17th is that moment where we're just saying, hey, respond to God. Listen, invest the time. My leadership is to lead you to that relationship. Nehemiah does the same thing, and then he says this is how the story continues. So they all are like, hey, okay, let's build this thing. Let's do this. But when Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite official, and Geshem the Arab heard of it, they mocked and ridiculed us, saying, so what's this that you're going to do? Are you rebelling against the king? Well, that's got to be almost laughable to Nehemiah, because he knows. Nehemiah knows the truth. I mean, he knows he's not rebelling. He's there at the king's pleasure. The king's giving him timber from his forest and safe patches. But the thing is the people in the city don't know where the king's at. Now it's their word against Nehemiah's word. And so they're fighting for the heart of the people. And so they're throwing up these smoke screens. And this is Nehemiah's reply. Then I replied to them, hey guys, the God of heaven is the one who will give us success. And we're his servants. And we're going to start building. But you have no share or claim or historic right in Jerusalem. And just from a history standpoint, from an Old Testament standpoint, from the nation of Israel standpoint, God makes many promises to the nation of Israel. And those are promises that are made to the nation of Israel and are still promises today, okay? God hasn't changed his plan with Israel, okay? In those promises, we are left out. I mean, unless you are of Jewish descent here, you're left. If you weren't born in the right family, you don't get those promises, okay? Because they're made to people of Israel, the nation of Israel. And that's the reality. And so when you read the Old Testament, you got to know that most of those promises that are made are not just for everybody. There are a lot of them made just for this people. And that's what Nehemiah is saying. Look, Jerusalem is our city, ordained by God. And you have no right here, no share, no claim, no historic right. This conversation is still going on today. We know that, right? It's all over, and it's always going to be that way. Why? Because the promises of God are the same yesterday, today, forever. It's still going to be there, okay? Now, the great thing that we have is that when Jesus comes on the scene, and as Paul expands the work of Jesus to not just the Jewish people, but to the Gentiles as well, he says this, that Jesus has broken down the wall separating Jews and Gentiles. Basically, God says, hey, nation of Israel, you are my people. But when Jesus comes in his death and resurrection, his blood is shed for all people, all nations. He breaks down the wall dividing nations. Now there's no longer Jew, nor Greek, slave, nor free, male, nor female, for we are all one in Christ, because that's the work of Jesus Christ. And he opens up the door of God's family to all who will believe, all who will say, I need forgiveness, I need a Savior. Jesus, your death proves that you're the Savior. Your resurrection from the dead means that you've defeated death, and I can step into your family because you are the way, the truth, and the life. And that's it. And now there's no longer. Jesus' promises are for everyone. Nehemiah is like, guys, you have no right here. You have no place here. Nehemiah is excluding. Let me tell you, like here in the church, that's the freedom. We say, come on, come on. Like even with the project like this, I don't care if you've been here 12 years, 16 years, or 12 days. 16 days. Like, come on in. Be a part of this family. It's open all. Here's my prayer. My prayer for us this week. God, let me experience your heart for the world. Even and perhaps especially when the world doesn't understand it. And then the question that I want us all to ask God is, God, will you show me how I can take ownership of this vision? It's a question I want you to wrestle with. And that's in your journal that's online as well. As you can, if you don't have one of these, you can pick up one on the way out. Here's what I want to close with. I know some of you think this is, all new and it's really quick, and I understand that. I just want you to know that we've been talking about this for a lot of years, and these are the three things that I think I just want you to leave with. It relates to Nehemiah and it relates to this project. Number one is this. They knew, these guys that were rebuilding Jerusalem, they knew they were doing something great. They were going to change their part of the world. They were going to build a wall around Jerusalem, and it was going to change the dynamics of that city. I promise you, this thing's going to change the dynamics of this city. And it's not just this city, it's not just Harrisburg that it's going to change. Because of the location that's close to 485, it kind of really opens us up to transforming larger and reaching larger segment of our city. Because it includes a hotel, there are going to be people coming from all over the nation to stay there. And it's going to give us an opportunity to interact with them. I mean, Eric shares the story, and he'll share it when he's here. 3,500 people have received Christ at a hotel. They just thought they were checking into a hotel. And God had a bigger plan for their life. And so that's just they knew they were standing up doing something. This thing is the same way. The second thing is this. They knew they were going to make a difference for their future generations. I don't know if they realized how big a difference. Those walls that they rebuilt, by the way, once they mobilized, it took them 52 days to rebuild the walls and the gates. Just takes a leader. Just takes people saying, let's do this. Those walls held for hundreds and hundreds of years until 70 AD when Rome invaded Jerusalem and tore it down. I mean, for generation after generation, their work transformed. This work that we're after, guys, it's so far beyond our scope and even our lifetime. We are setting up future generations for amazing work. We are going to create some income revenue streams that is going to fund mission work in this city and around the world. And we're going to be able to go further and faster and make a bigger difference. And I don't know who God is equipping to come after us, but I'm praying now for that person who doesn't have to struggle and figure out how to make this happen, but figures out, hey, I've got this. Now God's given me the stewardship of this 40 years from now or whenever. And now I'm going to take this further than any of us could even imagine. That's what's going to happen. And then the last thing is this. They knew that they were standing against evil and its grip on the world. They knew that in Jerusalem because they had people right in their face saying, what are you guys doing? We're not going to let this happen. They knew because they faced opposition. We don't know of any human opposition to this, okay? So don't get wigged out about any of that. But I do want to let you know this. I said this, like, anytime you take a God-ordained plan and you step into it, you better believe that you are staring evil right in the face in this world. And anytime you say, hey, enough with evil's grip on this world, enough with evil's grip on these high school students, enough with evil's grip on our marriage, enough with evil's grip on this community, on our families, on our world, enough. You are staring evil right in the face, and you will face opposition. And so I don't want to freak you out. I just want to get you ready. Because they knew they're standing against evil and its grip, and this place is going to do that. It's going to do that. So get ready. It's going to be exciting. You pray with me. God, thanks for a story like Nehemiah, the wisdom that he has to mobilize people. I pray, Father, that we would move through these steps from somebody should do that to we should do that, from we should do that to we're going to do that, and from we're going to do that to let's do this together. And I pray that as we do this, Lord, that you just teach us so much about yourself. I pray that you would provide just an abundance of unity among us all. I pray, God, that you would bless us, Lord, abundantly as we commit ourselves to do this. And I pray, Father, as we consider going all in, that you would also give us the wisdom to say no to certain things so that we can be all in. We love you, God. We love where you're leading us, and we trust you. And we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.